And I think we won some key races against election deniers.
1% though.
Yeah, but 1%.
1%, right?
1%. Are we confident that she couldn't win the Senate seat in 2024? Are we confident that does this show that the country's really repudiated that? And she was a flat out election denier.
I'm Ken Harbaugh.
What could possibly go wrong?
This is Burn the Boats, a show about making tough calls in tough times. America today faces a critical test. Our democracy is under threat. But good people are rising to the challenge. Now is the time to go all in. Now we burn the boats. My guest today is Bill Kristol, a lifelong Republican who served in 2 presidential administrations and founded The Weekly Standard, an influential conservative magazine. We had him on Burn the Boats some time ago, and that interview still holds up. I just re-listened to it. Since then, he has helped launch Defending Democracy Together, an organization created by Republicans with the goal of preserving democratic institutions. Bill, welcome to Burn the Boats.
Thanks, Ken, and I'm glad that old interview holds up. I never listen to my old stuff or read my old stuff because God knows what I said, but I'm taking everyone should take your word for it that it holds up well.
I normally don't. I'm not that self-indulgent, but I wanted to make sure we didn't just do a repeat.
Right.
And there's no chance of that because a lot has happened since we last talked. And I think we should tackle the big one first, the McCarthy tapes and the decision by the Speaker of the House to turn over 44,000 hours of footage from January 6th to the propaganda arm, and you've referred to it as such, of the Republican Party, Fox News, and Tucker Carlson. Most of us saw it coming, but it is still shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, insofar as anything can be shocking anymore, but of course one still has to be, if one maintains some hope in the country and maybe for conservatives and conservatism and maybe for the Republican Party, one can't help but be shocked. But just on your original point, which I think is an important one, that you made sort of implied in passing that, this was a while ago, we had our conversation and how much has changed. I think people don't recall that. I mean, and I was talking to someone about this yesterday who's also an original Never Trumper, and we were Never Trump for good reasons, it turned out, I think very accurate reasons, but it wasn't obvious it was going to go the way it went or all the way it went, right? I mean, it was not crazy in 2017-18 to think, okay, maybe the damage will be contained. Maybe the Republican Party won't go entirely in with Trump. Maybe they'll constrain him in the administration, as they were doing somewhat at the beginning with H.R. McMaster and those people. And it wasn't crazy in 2020 to think some of those people would come out and actually say Trump shouldn't be reelected president. And it wasn't crazy in 2021, certainly after January 6th, to think maybe they finally will turn against him. And it wasn't crazy after November 2022 to say, okay, maybe this is really the warning shot that just for self-interest, Republicans will go in the other direction. But it wasn't crazy. And, I sort of didn't entertain too many of those hopes because I was pretty pessimistic once Trump and Trumpism got unleashed. And you've talked about this a lot. It's hard to put that toothpaste back in the tube. And, we've all seen that. But still, it is striking how bad things are, at least on the conservative and Republican side. I mean, the country's rallied in certain ways, and there've been some good election results, and Biden's been a good president, I think. So I'm not a doom and gloom guy in general, but the degree of that we now take for granted a level of demagoguery, a level of nativism and anxiety fostering and grievance mongering and totally reckless and irresponsible behavior like McCarthy is showing with Fox, and whitewashing of January 6th, and being either pro-January 6th or anti-January 6th, either pro-Putin or anti-Putin. We just think, okay, that's kind of what the Republican Party is. Of course, DeSantis is going to come out for, against helping Ukraine in a serious way, because that's kind of where Trump is, and where Trump is where the Republican Party is. But taking all that for granted, it shows how far things have gone downhill, and what a serious problem, for the Republican Party and for conservatism, and what a serious problem that is for the country, because, it's one of the 2 big parties, right?
Do you ever grow numb to the outrage? I think we both share a real concern that the voters are growing numb to it. The Overton window has shifted so much that what would have been shocking just a few years ago is now normal. Do you ever get tired of sounding the alarm?
Yeah, I don't get tired really, because I think it's important. I mean, James Carville wrote a wonderful piece for the Bulwark, which you've written a good pieces for too, in just October 2020. And James has been to many presidential campaigns and been a major figure in American politics and done those campaigns around the world, and commented on everything. And it was a moving piece. He said, "I've never cared more about anything than this fight to stop Trump and Trumpism." And in a way, that's putting it too negatively, to stop Trump, but to save our democracy, let's say, and strengthen it ultimately, of course. And I was moved to have James write that. This is the guy who was the main architect of Bill Clinton's winning presidential campaign. Whatever you think of Clinton, how many people are the main architects of a winning presidential campaign? That's a pretty rare, group to be in. And he came out of it respected, and he's had and people like him and so forth and respect him. And for him to say that, I sort of feel that too. You get a little tired sometimes. You feel like you're saying the same thing for the 30th time. But it's really important. And I've, had the privilege of being in government at a reasonably, somewhat high level and editing a prominent magazine and so forth. But I do think this fight is as important as any. And I think it's both a defensive fight, obviously, against demagoguery and Trumpism and nativism and bigotry and so forth, and just craziness. But it's also could lay the groundwork for a strengthening of our democracy here at home and around the world. I think we see that with the reaction to Ukraine to some degree. So I don't get too tired of being alarmed, but I have to think of new ways to say I am alarmed, I suppose.
How do you decide what to focus on? I'd love your help defining this fight, as you put it, because there are so many elements of it. Just yesterday, I think you tweeted something about this Republican congressman. I'm going to pull it up here, Andy Ogles, who, and this is the tweet. I'll share your response in a second. He raised nearly $25,000 for a child burial garden using a photo of a stillborn child, promising a place for burial of babies with benches for families and a life-size statue of Jesus. And he stole the money. And your response, of course, the House Republican Conference, there is no bottom. Between that and Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos and Trumpism writ large, how do you focus on the fight?
I mean, everyone has to make his or her own mind up, obviously, not just what's most important, but where they have the most, what's the term I should use, value added. Obviously not all, we can't all be expert on everything, and there can be very important issues that I don't have anything much to contribute beyond, and all I could do and do is cite other people, which is, I think, an important thing to remember. You can contribute by publicizing the work of other good people. You don't have to be an expert on everything yourself. I personally am very interested in foreign policy. So Ukraine has been a big focus of the last year, obviously, and before to a considerable degree. I've been to Europe a couple of times in the last 6 weeks to try to talk to people about how we can do a better job, sort of outside government, coordinating the case for Ukraine and just some of the policies, actually, the efforts with some of our European friends. I do think January 6th, democracy, the kind of core sickness of Trumpism, very important to focus on. But, one learns over the years that the way you get people to notice things, and this is totally reasonable of people, is by giving them an example. You can't just abstractly talk about democracy 24/7. It isn't very persuasive at some point, nor should it be in a way. It's got to, what's the example when you say this party is corrupt? So that's where I pick up something like that. I haven't done any research on it, to be honest. I read the article. It seemed well researched, and I retweeted it. So I think it is important to make people see what it is they're embracing when they embrace or even rationalize or excuse much of the current Republican Party.
And you don't ever worry that the performative obnoxiousness of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene is a distraction. It's actually a helpful illustration of the larger, deeper threat, the anti-democratic forces that are building in the party.
So I think that's a good question, Ken, and I guess I'll put it this way. I think the performative obnoxiousness can't be dismissed. Or I don't agree with some of my fellow Never-Trumpers who are like, can you believe how ludicrous they are? What a self-defeating, farce that's going to be. I mean, that's a big mistake, in my opinion. I mean, not always, but often that's a mistake, because you sort of dismiss it instead of saying, you know what, some of that performative farce is part of the show, but they are getting more powerful. Everyone made fun. I mean, I'll just take two. You mentioned Kevin McCarthy to start our conversation. Everyone made fun of Kevin McCarthy. He was desperately trying to keep in Trump's good graces, while also keeping in the good graces of donors who wanted to get beyond Trump. And then he desperately got through 15 ballots to become Speaker. He's Speaker of the House. I can have contempt for him, and I can dislike what he stands for and what he's done, and I can hope that he's not Speaker for too long, and that his power is limited and so forth. But it's foolish to sort of say, well, he's really embarrassed himself. I mean, he's going nowhere. What a humiliation to him. He should have repudiated Trump. Well, not from his point of view. He's Speaker of the House. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, has she failed or succeeded? Are there two-term members? What is she, second term, right? Are there two-term members of Congress who have been more responsible, who are more powerful than she is? So I think we need to be very sober about the fact that a lot of the stuff that we think correctly is stupid, conspiracy mongering, kind of grotesque performative stuff. It doesn't mean it can't work. Doesn't mean it can't work in the current environment. And of course, Trump benefited hugely from this kind of, well, how ridiculous is this? And what about, and it turned out, so we should both make fun of it. I'm not against that either, of course. We shouldn't be just sourpusses or something, but we shouldn't make light of the danger.
I think you're absolutely right. The adjectives you just used, grotesque and obscene, could be applied to Trump's 2016 campaign, which a lot of people laughed off, and look where it led. And the idea that
and I thought it would be
like
self-defeating in the primaries and attack on McCain and stuff. And I don't think, I think I was right to see that this was a glimpse of where we were going if we went down that path. What I was wrong about was thinking that there'd be a huge revulsion against going down that path. But you got to learn a lesson from that, right? Which is, as you say, that just because some of us were revolted by it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who, unfortunately, are less revolted or more open to it or willing to excuse it. I think that's a large part of it, and rationalize it. So no, it is. I remain alarmed.
Well, and applying that lesson tactically should lead us to wonder if someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene might not be on a short list for vice president. That's not out of the realm of possibility in a world where Donald Trump became president. So I'm with you, calling out the obnoxiousness, the grotesqueness of some of these performances is not a distraction.
Look, Carrie Lake probably really is on the short list for vice president, even more than for Trump, more than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Lost by 17,000 votes in Arizona. We were very involved. Sarah Longwell and I helped her out at the Defending Democracy Together, which is Republican Accountability Project, Republican Voters Against Trump, and all that, as you know. But we put a lot of money into Arizona those last 2 weeks and helped, I think, barely defeat her. And there was a lot of backslapping, which was good, and cheering. We did the right thing, and I think we won some key races against election deniers.
1%, though.
Yeah, but 1%.
1%.
1%. Are we confident that she couldn't win the Senate seat in 2024? Are we confident that does this show that the country's really repudiated that? And she was a flat-out election denier in a state that had a huge amount of emphasis on this, in a state where the Republican governor wasn't an election denier. Doug Ducey did the right thing, in a state where they had that insane audit. Remember all that nonsense in 2021, and they were discredited. Even there, in a state Biden carried. Even there, she came within 1%. So I think there's plenty to remain worried about. Now, look, if they say idiotic things or do just things that are so distasteful personally, it is totally reasonable to use that against them too. Not every voter's, one thing I've learned so much working with Sarah is not every voter is going to be moved by what I'm moved by, or I dare say what you and I are moved by. And therefore, if they're corrupt, let's just point out the corruption, right? If that drives them away from Trumpism more than the bigotry, that's fine. In a perfect world, would people see the bigotry and say, I can't tolerate that? Yes. But in an imperfect world, if they see the corruption, if they see the foolishness, whatever. So I'm for advancing, so to speak, on all fronts here and testing them all and seeing what works, as it were. And so I'm not for giving them just because something isn't fundamentally important, it is no reason not to highlight it as well.
Are you worried about reaching them? Here's my big concern, and we'll go back to the January 6th tapes. We know the truth about what happened on January 6th. We saw it with our own eyes. But if your stovepiped information from sources that aren't telling you, for example, that Fox News before January 6th knew that it was pumping out disinformation, if you're not hearing that, from Fox News. What chance is it that you're going to hear it from, or that these people are going to hear it from you and me? Are we in a media ecosystem now in which the old approaches to persuasion just don't work?
So I think it's a big problem, obviously, and Fox News is the best instance, or a very good instance of that, probably the best instance. And incidentally, so everything's exposed. Rupert Murdoch, Tucker Carlson, how dishonest they all were, knowingly dishonest. And nonetheless, Kevin McCarthy is doing what Tucker Carlson is cooperating with Tucker, more than cooperating, is sort of doing what Tucker Carlson wants to do, or is strengthening, giving exclusive rights to Tucker Carlson for what should be incidentally publicly shared and available tapes if you're going to make them public in the first place. And Tucker Carlson is dragging Ron DeSantis into being, if not pro-Putin, at least anti-Putin. So all the talk about, oh, that's really discrediting Fox, that's really discrediting Tucker Carlson, they're finished, which some of our friends, I think, indulged in a little bit of that a month ago. That's not the case. Now, do people like us respect Tucker Carlson or Fox News? No. I mean, I think the answer, I've thought a lot about this whole, echo chamber, social media bubble problem, and I don't have any magic solution. I guess my common sense sort of answer is, look, yeah, it's difficult. But if we get to 1 in 20 people, not every single person who watches Fox News only watches Fox News. Not every single person who watches Fox News never talks to anyone else who doesn't watch Fox News or read things online or read the Bulwark or read stuff on Twitter or read stuff that's influenced by stuff that maybe I would say on Twitter to call it to someone else's attention in a local news show. So if 1 in 20 of the people who watch Fox News talk to another, 1 in 5 people who don't watch Fox News, and it opens them up a little bit, that's important because we're on a very close margin here. And if you could just get a 5%, 10% of those viewers to say, maybe what I'm hearing isn't quite right. My cousin pointed this thing out to me, and it does seem like they really were defrauding people here, these Republican members of Congress, and they're not being disciplined. And maybe there's something kind of wrong with this whole party and this movement. Even if that's 5% of the Fox viewers, that's something.
At this point, knowing what we know about Fox News putting its stock price and its bottom line over the public interest, over even telling the truth, and knowing that it was spewing lies, have you come to a conclusion on whether people like us should be appearing on Fox News? Should Pete Buttigieg be telling his truths to that audience that almost never get them? He's very good at it. There aren't many like him, but is it worth it?
So I have mixed views, as I think maybe you do, judging from the question. I mean, or I think there are competing considerations. And in general, on this whole, should we work with this person? Should we appear on this forum? Should we go on it? I've faced this choice quite a few times. Should I debate this person at a college? On the one hand, God knows the student should hear a different point of view. On the other hand, I just don't want to be on the platform with this person and pretend that these arguments are being made in good faith. I guess the way I resolve that is, what different people should do in our world, if I can put it that way. Different people in our world should do different things. I mean, there's no one correct answer. Pete Buttigieg is a government official. I think it is appropriate for a government official to go on a network that has millions of viewers, and some of whose shows are sort of respectable on the margin, let's just say. But Bret Baier is different from Tucker Carlson, if that's what it is. And if he's going to be given a chance to make his argument and not just interrupted or ridiculed, I think it's worth his going on. I won't go on. I haven't gone on Fox since I left Fox in 2012, and I haven't gone on. I did Fox News Sunday a couple of times, as I recall, in 2017, and haven't gone on since. So, but I'm a private citizen, and I just can't stand it. Other people should do it, though. Incidentally, I have liberal friends who go on. And if you're a liberal, if you're more of a, for me, it's a little too close in a funny way. I just find it so repulsive what they've done that I just don't have confidence that I could keep calm and stuff. But this happens again on the college campus sort of situation. I have friends who are more liberal in a way than I am who debate a lot of these people. And I'm glad they do. Obviously students should hear a different point of view. Viewers should hear a different point of view. I think, it depends a little bit on the issues. If you're a military guy and they're discussing something in that's military in a semi-serious way, even if it's a bad platform, maybe it's important to go on and show that, or if you can get to veterans and persuade them not to get recruited by the Proud Boys, that's an extremely important thing to do. So I'm not telling people don't ever talk to any of these people or don't go on any of these platforms. I do think people are differently situated in terms of their background, their responsibilities, their just, are they government officials or not, and so forth. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, but I think people should hesitate. I'm not one of those who thinks we've got to go on every platform. And thank you for having me. I really am grateful to be here. I mean, saying that to Tucker Carlson, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, well, I would draw the line at Tucker Carlson. I like your checklist. It has to be a respectful host, arguments made in good faith. The line I've gone up to is a weekly appearance on an AM radio show, but with someone I really respect, a former Medal of Honor winner who I know we're going to disagree with on policy matters, but it's going to be respectful. And that audience gets pretty fired up. I don't usually listen to the comments when they come in, but if you're right, if we're persuading 1 in 20, it might be worth it.
No, I think that's really true. And I think, there are people in good faith who have been, you and I would say, misled or rationalize certain things that they shouldn't have and so forth, believe certain things that aren't true. But that's different from being, that's different from what Fox News has been shown, which we already knew really to be doing.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp.
Getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and changing. The last few years, especially, have been a wild ride filled with my own personal self-realizations and growth. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk through things. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Because talking and working through things in our past allows us to deal with experiences that may be having a major impact on the way we go about our days. Therapy is an incredibly helpful tool for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. Over time, we can learn to become the best versions of ourselves. And look, therapy is for everyone, not just people who have experienced major trauma, because what you're working through matters. Never discount that. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/boats today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/boats. You are from, and I think I mean this as a compliment, the intellectual wing of the Republican Party. Well, the former intellectual wing of the Republican Party, and I want to get inside that a bit because we've had the consultant gunslingers on here, the Stuart Stevens, et cetera, and I understand when they explain why their buddies stuck with Trump. They did it for the money. How do you explain your colleagues in that intellectual part of the Republican Party who convinced themselves that this was a tiger worth riding? I'm talking about, the National Review folks, right. Some of your former colleagues at the Weekly right. Standard. I get being in it for the money, but you're not staying at National Review for the money, are you? Or the Federalist for the money?
No, but so I think it's a good question. I mean, even the political consultants, some of them aren't just in it for the money. I do think, what motivates people is complicated, of course. And there's the fame sure. and the glory and the status and the access to power and the sense that, I think that
I guess I'm using money.
No, I understand. But I mean, so intellectuals,
all those things, but there's more to it. Thought process required to rationalize an alliance with
Trump. So that's, a very good question and really not one which is an easy answer. I do think one should stipulate, though, that intellectuals are not subject to the allure of money, fame, power, et cetera. And that's important, I think, the degree to which, and it's, in a way it was easier for me. I think I was older and it's like, I just can't stand it. I'm not going to do that. And if I'm not ever invited to any White House again or not part of the Republican Party, I can live with it. Harder if you're 35, 45, you've sort of vested quite a lot in this particular world. Suddenly this world goes in a slightly weird direction and you're not really crazy about it, but this is kind of the world you've placed your bet on, right? If you want to think of it this way. And maybe I could just tolerate it for a few years and get through it. I think there's a lot of that going on. I think people start off with that attitude often. It's very true of the National Review people and the Wall Street Journal editorial page. And then they gradually that's a hard attitude to maintain. It's hard psychologically, and I think people have really studied this, to be a kind of very skeptical and open-eyed adherent to some cause, but still think I want to go along with it. It's a rational intellectual position, not one that I agree with in this case, but it's not a crazy position, of course. But once you're part of that movement or cause, hard to keep the skepticism, hard to keep the distance, hard to keep the checks. I wouldn't go that far. And suddenly it's like, I was sort of skeptical about it all, but there's something to this. And you know what? It's good that he's fighting back, because if he didn't fight back, we wouldn't even get the stuff we care about. And then it's like 3 months later, it's not just, I actually care about this other stuff too, because that's really what drives the liberals crazy. So it must be important. And, within about a year, in my experience, is kind of the time frame that it takes someone to go from an argument that you and I would disagree with, I think, but that is a reasonable kind of justification for going along with some stuff, to falling all the way into a kind of, yeah, go for it. Go. I'm on this team. This is team, I'm on team red, and that's that. And I hate team blue. And then people can really go crazy, incidentally, and go into Michael Flynn land and stuff. So that's another problem psychologically. So I'm sure the psychologists have studied this more than I have, but I think there is a real slippery slope of rationalization which eventually usually becomes a kind of all-in process. Some people stay on the kind of rationalization side, a Wall Street Journal editorial page. We don't really like some of this stuff, but the left's worse and woke and this and that. And incidentally, I want DeSantis, not Trump. And I will express disappointment with Trump, or even with DeSantis on Ukraine. Disappointment, not really condemnation, not really this is a disgrace, not really this is extremely dangerous to have the two leading Republican presidential candidates on the side of, basically appeasing Putin. But I'm disappointed. He got some bad advice. I hope he rethinks. That's kind of where they are now as we speak here in mid-March, I guess, on DeSantis. So I think, and that stuff has done a lot of damage. I mean, one point I've tried to make a bit over the last few years is, everyone's focused on Fox for good reason. Everyone's focused on the base. Everyone's focused on QAnon and the craziness and the conspiracy theories, and that's very, very dangerous. But the let's call it the more sophisticated enablers of all of that, the people who minimize its damage, who say, well, that stuff's kind of crazy, but let's look at the real complaints that they have and the grievances that they have, and look what's happening at some college campus somewhere with wokeness or whatever. Those people deserve a huge amount, in my opinion, of the blame and the responsibility as well. It wouldn't have, if it were just the base and Fox and the kind of rabid Trumpism, be a problem for the country. But it would be a problem the way Pat Buchanan was a problem. It would be a 20 or 30% problem, is the way I think of it, for the country, and manageable. Joe McCarthy, George Wallace. I mean, they can do a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but not, what makes it really a problem is all the people who should know better, by which I would include the intellectuals, but also the donors, the very wealthy people, the people who, the elected officials who go along. This is where it's, and that's what makes it, and that's what allowed Trump to take over the whole Republican Party. And that's what's allowed, this to become so pervasive and so dangerous. Every defeated, sensible Republican candidate in 2022, some of whom I talked to a little bit and tried to, I'm not much of a Republican anymore, but I tried to help them a little. The moment they lost, but I'm endorsing the winner of my race here because I'm a Republican and we've got to keep the Democrats out. Those people have a lot, in my opinion, to answer for as well. Of course, they tried to fight against the worst people, so I admire them for that, I guess. But then they endorse the worst people. And in a way, because they're more reasonable, they bring a lot more influential people along with them. So I'm very hostile, I've got to say, to the, sort of better educated and wealthier, frankly, enablers of this movement that otherwise would be, as I say, a kind of, I think, an unpleasant and damaging populist movement, but one that you could sort of limit.
the problem with your math in describing that populist movement as a 20 or 30% problem is that now the Republican Party, the party itself, has entered this Faustian bargain with them. They cannot survive electorally without that extremist fringe.
No, totally.
And it's been a long time since we've had a major party that has relied on an extremist fringe to stay in power.
I think that's an extremely important point, and you put it very well. I mean, the way I've sort of been saying it is, you could have had a Trump presidency. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. You know, he won the Republican nomination sort of in a fluky way with, Jeb Bush being the opponent, so he could be against the Bushes, and then the fractured field. He never got to 50% of the vote till quite late in the process and so forth. And then he wins the Electoral College against Hillary Clinton, draws an inside straight, and she's hurt by Comey and all this kind of stuff. You could have imagined after that, and I thought it was possible. I was very worried that it wouldn't happen this way, and I turned out to be right to be worried. But it was not crazy to think, okay, we're going to have a 4-year sort of wacky, not good for the country Trump presidency. But he's not going to have the Republican Party in Congress is not going to go along with him. For parts, even some of his own officials will spend most of their time constraining him, and that did happen a little bit. And we'll, kind of get through it. And I don't know what the analogy would be in terms of other things, but you can, one can think of this in kind of life, right? You get some sort of bad CEO of some corporation and, but everyone kind of prevents it from doing too much damage to the corporate culture and to the corporation itself and to its products. And, he goes away and then you get back to normal. That wasn't a crazy thing to hope for in 2017. But the accommodation was so thorough and this is where the party capitulating to Trump was the key. In a way, historians, I think, are going to look at it and say that was a really key moment, almost more of a key moment than Trump winning the nomination or winning the presidency. People have always known a demagogue could conceivably, if he got lucky, sort of at a bad moment, win the presidency. What people didn't quite expect, and I didn't either, was that one of our two major parties would succumb to that.
I think the best example and the most alarming example of that moral accommodation is Ron DeSantis himself, who not long ago described himself as a Paul Ryan Republican and has seen this lane open up in Trump's wake, and his moral accommodation seems complete now. You referred to just one example of it, his describing the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine as a territorial or a regional dispute. I can't remember
territorial
the exact language,
dispute, I think. Yeah.
Territorial dispute, but on everything from book banning to going after Mickey Mouse, the accommodation of the extremists by a leading contender for the Republican presidential nomination is taking us somewhere we haven't been.
I very much agree. And I think the combination of that in turn, has its own ripple effect. People just get so used to a certain kind of rhetoric, demagoguery, intolerance that it just becomes normalized. And it's very hard to sort of unnormalize it once it's normalized, I mean, I spent the first couple of years looking for Trump presidency. Can you believe he's saying this? Can you believe he's accusing the other major party of treason? At one point, Trump tweeted something. Those Democrats in Congress are treasonous. I mean, they just were opposing him on some issue, And I said, this is very bad for our politics to have what the president of the United States called them the leaders of the other party traitors. It does not normally happen, and it shouldn't happen. And it really is what happens in a much sicker political system, and can have terrible consequences. And at the time, it was, oh yeah, that's really bad. Well, that's kind of one piece. That's Trump. Now it's just routine. I mean, not routine, but it's close to routine in the kind of rhetoric that's used in our politics, and from the Republicans and from the right, because it is asymmetric, as the political scientists say. There are some people on the left who are extreme, God knows, and I could do without a lot of this, some of the woke stuff and some of the identity politics and all that, but it is not a comparable problem. I mean, this is what's really striking to me. And all these Republican donor types and conservative intellectual types, that's one of their main talking points. Well, I mean, the problem on the left is just as bad as the problem on the right. It's just empirically false. I mean, you cannot say that with a straight face. I mean, it would be like saying in Germany in 1933 that the German Communist Party, which was a bad party, or even some of the weak Social Democrats who were in some ways a weak party, they weren't a bad party, that's comparable to the threat from German National Socialism and Hitler. I mean, it's just not true. And so there are times when the left can be horrible and more dangerous. I would say that about the Soviet Union. And so I'm not making a universal pronouncement here, but the idea that, there are equal strains of illiberalism in the American left and the American right is just nonsense at this point.
You mentioned the Republican donor class. How important is the money? I mean, we saw in the run up to 2016 that it was all lining up behind Jeb, and it didn't really matter. It all seems to be, not all of it, a lot of it seems to be lining up behind DeSantis. Do people in our orbit, do the intellectuals, do the talking heads make too much of the billionaire class choosing their favorites?
Yes, and I think there were
have in a primary.
There were a fair number of primaries in 2022, weren't there, where the money was, mixed, and where there was plenty of money behind the more respectable or establishment candidates, who then lost to the Trumpy candidates, who in some cases spent a lot less money. Pennsylvania, I'd say that was the case, or at least spent less money. Now, the caveat I would say is I think my world, the kind of old-fashioned Republican types, still think somehow that we're the establishment. And they have a few of these rabble-rousers. It's very bad that these rabble-rousers have done so well. But we've got to mobilize the establishment against them. But as my colleague Tim Miller put it, they are the establishment. There is a MAGA establishment. And that establishment has a lot of money. So it's not as if Trump doesn't raise a lot of money. It's not as if, J.D. Vance didn't raise a lot of money in Ohio where you are. It's not as if a bunch of Trump candidates didn't both raise money from small dollar, obviously grassroots stuff, which they're very good at, Marjorie Taylor Greene and all. But also there are big donors, and there's this infrastructure now, media infrastructure. Fox is the most famous part of it, but a sort of quasi pseudo-intellectual infrastructure, ideas infrastructure, think tanks. I mean, I guess you got to give them credit for actually seeing that they need to go build all these things, but they've done it. And grassroots organizations and fake grassroots organizations and Moms for Liberty and constitutional sheriffs. And, and again, on our side, there's a certain amount of, can you believe how stupid this one is? But you know what? It's out there and it's doing stuff and it's having an effect. You must see this in Ohio quite a lot, actually. And so I think we shouldn't underestimate the amount of money that's even on that side. And some of the donors are pretty famous at this point, Peter Thiel, the Mercers and stuff. And again, there's a certain tendency to say, well, they're like the flaky billionaires. And then there's the kind of real ones who are somehow responsible. I don't know. Is Elon Musk? I mean, he is flaky, but does he have quite a lot of influence on American discourse right now? I mean, yes, I think so, and so I think it's a mistake to minimize the extent to which MAGA is a real force, and unfortunately, not a force that's going to go away very easily or quickly in American politics.
Hi, Burn the Boats fans. I want to take a quick break to talk about our sponsor for today's show, Rhone. Men's closets are long overdue for a radical reinvention, and Rhone has stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection represents the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible clothes I've ever found. Rhone makes it so easy to get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. Rhone's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy whatever life throws your way, from your commute to work to weekends at the kids' ball games. Looking good is easy with Rhone's wrinkle release technology, which makes wrinkles magically disappear, seriously, as you wear the products. It's really that easy. I don't have time between work and family and everything in between to worry about dry cleaning or ironing. With Rhone, I don't have to. I just wear and go. And I feel great doing it. Even after a long day, Rhone feels clean and new and just as comfortable as the moment I put it on. You got to try it out. Head to rhone.com/boats and use promo code BOATS to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/boats and use code BOATS. Trust me, Rhone makes choosing what to wear not just easy, but classy and comfortable. That's rhone.com/boats. I want to make sure, I think we're aligned on this. When you say MAGA, it's not Trump. I mean, it is a movement that now has its own momentum. It has its own guide stars. and DeSantis could carry that torch every bit as powerfully and grotesquely as Trump did, right?
I very much agree, with a slight caveat that I don't know that that it would be every bit as powerfully, because I do think the original, the way a friend of mine put it to me, who studied history and Italy and Mussolini and all this, the original demagogue has a certain, and if he's a good demagogue.
Are you talking about Ruth Ben-Ghiat?
Yeah, no, but I mean, she's good at makes this point too. I mean, the original demagogue has a kind of power that it's not clear that the successor can replicate. Maybe he can. He certainly in Florida has been a very popular, he's won a huge re-election victory. So there's some evidence that he can. But we're also seeing in the way in which he's slightly stumbling in his presidential campaign that maybe he can't, right? And so in that respect, Trump, I think Trump, it's not crazy to remain focused on Trump in the sense that he's the one who did it. Maybe someone else could do it, and that would be horrible. And others have done it, God knows, at the state level, and that's bad. But I think Trump, I'd say two things. Trump has done it, so he could do it again. And also, once Trump did it and was president for 4 years, this is sort of your point, though, I think, the toothpaste was out the tube. And it might not have happened. I mean, it wasn't inevitable that all this would happen if Trump had lost. Who knows what the country would look like. But once you're president and hammering away at this and legitimizing it, and funding it in some way, president of the United States, it's very hard for people like me to say, that's crazy. That's just a freakish, flukish thing. The business world looked at that, and 6 months in, they realized, well, this guy's president for the next 3.5 years. And he's going to use the powers of the government to help his friends and hurt his enemies to some degree. And the Republicans in Congress are going to do that to some degree. And Kevin McCarthy's going to do it now to some degree. So I'm disgusted that these businesses are sucking up to Kevin McCarthy. From their point of view, hey, Bill, he's Speaker of the House. I'm running a massive corporation here. I can't have the Speaker of the House furious at me. Am I going to give money to some of the Republicans running for re-election? Yes. Am I going to say you can't help this one who's really a lunatic? Maybe I'll try to say that, but that's not really the way the system works, right? So the degree to which the Trump's presidency, the takeover of the Republican Party, which you've correctly focused on, has made it harder for major institutions to just say, you're beyond the boundaries, I mean, we tried that with January 6th. We're not giving money to anyone who was voted to overturn elections. That was the correct position to take, and still is, in my opinion. But I'll take an organization I've worked with a lot over the years, AIPAC, which I pro-Israel group, which I like and respect. Got an email from them the other day. Here are the people we're supporting in 2024. They always support incumbents if they're pro-Israel. And the list included election deniers and people who are terrible. And a friend of mine wrote back and said, look, I'm pro-Israel, but you don't even have to oppose them necessarily. But how can you support these people? American democracy matters a lot, too, not just Israel, whether they vote for aid to Israel. But, AIPAC, I know the people who run AIPAC and they're friends of mine. And I know that they're in a tough position and they're trying to, figure out the right thing to do. And this, and some other people are in a less tough position, to be honest, and are just looking out for their financial interests or whatever. But I think this is what happens when it gets institutionalized. This is where, again, the Republican Party becoming Trumpist was so important. It's otherwise, you might have had a one-term kind of fluky thing, and people would get more of a normal politics again. So anyway, I do think this is why one reason the problem is is really difficult to deal with now. I mean, it needs to be fought, God knows, and we do need to fight it, and even more because it's a persisting and serious problem. It's not that was a wacky 4 years. Thank God we get through that. That's the wrong attitude. I think you and I agree.
You said recently, and it was either in conversation with Charlie Sykes or Fred Wellman, that the anti-democratic stuff overlaps with the culture war. Stuff. I'm wondering how you see that overlap, because I think about Ron DeSantis's MO, and it has been all culture war, drafting in Trump's wake, hammering home the culture war stuff. How does that implicate anti-democratic tendencies,
or at least anti-liberal democracy, or the illiberal stuff? Okay. Let's say is very much a cousin of the anti-democratic stuff. I think that's true. If you believe in liberal democracy, you really believe you shouldn't overturn election results. That's kind of an important peaceful transition of power is kind of an important part of our of what makes a liberal democracy work. But so is free speech, and so is not using the powers of the government arbitrarily against the private sector, and so forth. And so, no, I think the illiberalism is key. And you see it so much in DeSantis's rhetoric, but also now, unfortunately, in people who are rationalizing what DeSantis is doing. And I'm very struck by this phrase he uses. It's just a phrase, so you shouldn't over interpret it, obviously. But Florida's where woke goes to die? Isn't that his idiotic talking
right?
About? And we think
the
about
free state,
the free state of Florida, where they're busy shutting down, the ability to have one woke teacher. I mean, I don't know. I went to school with mostly liberal teachers, but I mean, if one teacher's woke, okay, you know what? That happens, right? It's a free country. You're going to have a lot of different teachers in your public school. You're going to have a lot of different professors at your university. And if one of them believes in critical race theory, I'm not very sympathetic to that, but he or she should be able to teach his course. Not now if he or she is grading down students who don't agree with him politically, if that person is not even acknowledging, allowing for a healthy debate in class, that's a legitimate problem that should be called to the attention of the university administration or the department chair or whatever. But the idea that you're not allowed to have a point of view as a teacher or professor or government employee is pretty astonishing. And so what struck me about the where woke goes to die is it's sort of vaguely authoritarian or totalitarian in its spirit. I mean, Florida, a state that doesn't promote wokeness, okay, or doesn't fund wokeness or keeps a balanced field for free speech. That's a legitimate thing to say. It doesn't sound as cute. But woke shouldn't go to die anywhere. Woke should not be, in my opinion, favored particularly by the government either. But people are entitled to be woke, And DeSantis' attitude really is, in a way, I want a country in which no one ever can say these things. That is real. When you really push down, he wouldn't say it this way, but when you really push down to kind of what he's suggesting, and God knows there are others who are not DeSantis who just say it the way I just said it, right? And, if someone like you and I were talking before the show began about guns and the gun fetishization and the extremism that's taken over what might have been once a kind of rational Second Amendment point of view. And if someone said that, the Second Amendment's been distorted totally, are you not allowed to have that view now? Are you not allowed to teach a class in which you provide competing arguments about whether the Heller case, I think its name was, in the Supreme Court was correctly decided? Are you not allowed to read the dissents in that case as opposed to the majority opinion? I mean, that is the thrust of DeSantis' illiberalism, I'm afraid.
That illiberalism and the excesses of his rhetoric, I think is really out of competition with Trump and them trying to outdo each other to win that chunk of the base that they need to win those primaries. I don't know if you watched part or all of Trump's speech at CPAC, but that to me was really his campaign launch speech, not the one at Mar-a-Lago.
No, I think that's a good point.
It was the speech at CPAC where he said, and you just had a great article in your magazine, The Bulwark, by Joe Walsh, who we had on a couple weeks ago, who said, laugh if you must at the CPAC craziness, but take seriously what it portends about American politics. And it was the quote by Trump about the final battle. Let me see if I can find it. Talking about the 24 election. This is the final battle. They know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. This is it. Either they win or we win. And if they win, we no longer have a country. That's vintage Trump, but with the power of the ex-presidency behind him. And I mean, we talked about losing our sense of outrage due to numbness, but that is as terrifying as just about anything he said.
Totally agree. And look, that's laying the predicate for, 10,000 armed people assembling outside the election counting hall in Phoenix or the state capitol building in East Lansing, and saying that I don't believe the count. I don't believe Trump lost the state by half a point or 1 point or whatever it might be in 2024. And we need to, overturn those results. And I mean, the degree to which I think we've solved some of the federal problems, the Electoral Count Act of, what Congress will do. We're probably more prepared here in Washington, D.C. for possible stuff. But the degree to which there's possibility of violence and intimidation and out around the country has not gone away. We defeated the worst election in ours. That was very important. I don't think the governor of Michigan or of Wisconsin or Pennsylvania is going to, help overturn the results. So that's a very good thing. And that those governors have considerable power and secretaries of state have considerable power. But the degree to which that kind of rhetoric legitimizes an awful lot of people out there and a lot of county officials and so forth, state legislators, to be totally reckless and irresponsible in their rhetoric, and then encourages, unfortunately, a lot of citizens to just think, okay, well, if this is the final election nation, if we've lost the country, we've got to go make sure this doesn't happen. And again, in states which have open carry and no permitting or, for weapons and no tests for mental stability, frankly, or not having been a felon. I mean, it's very dangerous. I thought that Joe Walsh piece was very good on that. Don't you can laugh at it and it's a little whack, it's crazy, but it's not. It is dangerous. It is dangerous.
Yeah, it's terrifying stuff, which I can't in good conscience end on. What gives you hope, Bill?
Well, I think we have beat back, in 2018 in a way, but certainly in 2020 and 22, some of the worst parts of Trump himself in 2020 and some of the worst parts of Trumpism. And that's good and encouraging. And some that's A. B, I think the Democratic Party, this will sound crazy to say, no one else will say this, so I'll say it as an ex-Republican, kind of gives me hope. It's a much healthier Democratic Party than I thought it might be 10 years ago. It's on foreign policy, which we care a lot about. I think it's a pretty, I think, kind of old. It's like Hubert Humphrey or Scoop Jackson or a kind of healthy, liberal anti-communist party. On domestic policy, there are a few things that I wouldn't do, in terms of spending and all that, but it's basically committed to markets. It wants a robust safety net and welfare state, which is fine. And then there are complicated issues of regulation and the banks and all that. But recently we had the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, and I thought actually it was Biden administration's been pretty good. The way Yellen and Powell handled that was impressive. And I think they probably, I say this now, God knows when this is up a week from now, what will be happening with the banking system. But I feel like they probably did a pretty good job of stemming, a potential systemic, real big problem. And so I think the systems, some of the guardrails held very well in 2020. Others of the guardrails are shaky. Some of them we've fixed a little bit. Others we haven't fixed well. So, I mean, it's a mixed bag in terms of if you came down from 30,000 feet and said, is this society healthy? Are the guardrails strong? Are different institutions strong? I think we'd have mixed verdicts on a lot of them. And there are a lot of problems that they're hard to deal with, social media and stuff. But it's not like everything's falling apart. And the U.S. remains a very strong country and a lot of good things happening in it. And finally, I would say, having been in Europe a couple of times in the last 6 weeks, the degree to which belief in liberal democracy, the understanding that this is what the 21st century should be a liberal democratic century. It should be a century, not a century in which Putin gets away with brutal war crimes and invading a neighbor, not a century in which Orban gets to shut down universities and the press, not a century of Xi or of Iran, theocrats, but a century of liberal democracy, of elections, of free speech, of progress, innovation. I think that's actually stronger than it might have been, than I would have thought a few years ago. And actually Europe, which people like me tend to think, Europe, they're kind of complacent and, not like we are, they see it up close, the threat. And I think there's a lot, and younger Europeans, incidentally, and often center left, some center right too, though, who really are reminded how important liberal democracy is.
Yeah, they're kind of like the sleeping giant. Who would have ever imagined Europe would be characterized the way the U.S. was in the late 30s. Bill, this has been really enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back. Hopefully, not as much will happen between this time and the next time we have.
Yeah, hopefully, we're only discussing good news. But Ken, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Our blue wall stopped the red wave and election deniers got denied election. That's why we're celebrating with the new Democracy Prevails team. We've got lots of work to do, but we should all be proud that when democracy was tested, democracy prevailed. You've earned this. Don't wait. Get yours right now at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.